They say love has no color, no borders, no rules. But the world does. This is a story about the kind of love that lives in shadows because bringing it into the light would cost too much. Kristen learned early that some kinds of love were quiet not because they were gentle but because they were afraid. She stood barefoot on the cold marble floor of Kang Joon-hyuk's penthouse, staring out through floor-to-ceiling glass windows that framed Seoul like a living painting. Neon lights blinked below, traffic hummed like a restless heartbeat, and somewhere far beneath them, life moved on without ever knowing she existed up here. The city knew his name. Kang Joon-hyuk, the golden heir, tech billionaire, media darling, the man newspapers called Korea's most eligible bachelor. But Kristen? Kristen was a secret. She wrapped her silk robe tighter around her body, her dark skin glowing softly under the dim lights of the penthouse. The night air kissed her bare shoulders as she exhaled slowly, wondering, not for the first time, how love could feel so warm and so lonely at the same time. Behind her, Joon-hyuk emerged from the bedroom, shirtless, his hair still damp from the shower. He moved with effortless confidence, the kind that came from knowing the world bent for you. He slid his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're thinking too much again," he murmured. Kristen smiled faintly. "Am I?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. He kissed her neck, slow and familiar, a touch that always made her close her eyes despite herself. In moments like these, he loved her without restraint, without hesitation, without fear. In moments like these, she almost believed she belonged. They had been together for nearly 2 years. 2 years of stolen moments and carefully planned disappearances. Private flights instead of commercial ones. Hidden entrances. Restaurants booked under assistants' names. Never once had they walked hand in hand in daylight. Kristen hadn't asked at first. She told herself it was cultural, complicated, that as life came with expectations she didn't yet understand. But questions had a way of growing teeth. Earlier that evening, they had attended a gala. Together, but not together. Kristen entered through the side door in a simple black dress, elegant but deliberately unremarkable. Joon-hyuk arrived an hour later in a tailored tuxedo, cameras flashing as women in designer gowns smiled too brightly beside him. She watched him from the balcony above. She watched him charm reporters, bow politely, laugh effortlessly. She watched another woman, a socialite, familiar and safe, stand at his side. And she watched herself remain unseen. Back in the penthouse now, the silence felt heavier. "Your mother called again," Kristen said softly, still facing the window. Joon-hyuk stiffened almost imperceptibly. "She wants you to come to dinner next week." He released her and walked toward the bar, pouring himself a drink. "She always wants something," he said dismissively. Kristen turned to face him then. Her eyes were calm, but there was something fragile beneath the surface, something he had learned to ignore. "I meant," she hesitated. "She wants to meet the woman you're dating." He took a sip, avoiding her gaze. "You're not ready for that yet." The words landed gently, but they cut all the same. "Ready for what?" Kristen asked quietly. "To be real?" Joon-hyuk sighed, rubbing his temple. "Kristen, please. You know it's not that simple." She walked closer, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. "I've learned your language, your culture. I've respected your boundaries," she said. "I've stood in the shadows for you." She stopped in front of him. "I just want to know where I fit." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Affection, conflict, maybe even guilt. He reached out, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. "You fit here," he said. "With me." But Kristen knew what he hadn't said. "Not with my family. Not with my world. Not with my name." She nodded slowly, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets, Joon-hyuk asleep beside her, Kristen stared at the ceiling. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing and wondered how someone could hold her so tightly at night and let her go so easily by morning. She loved him. Deeply. Dangerously. But love, she was beginning to realize, shouldn't feel like erasing yourself to make someone else comfortable. Outside, Seoul glowed endlessly, Brilliant, loud, unapologetic. Kristen lay awake in silence, slowly understanding the truth she had been avoiding. She wasn't hidden because he didn't love her. She was hidden because loving her openly would cost him something. And he wasn't sure she was worth the price. The argument didn't start as an argument. It began the way most devastating moments do, softly. Kristen stood in front of Jun Hyuk's walk-in closet, her fingers trailing over suits that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Navy, charcoal, black, perfectly pressed, perfectly controlled. A life curated down to its smallest details. Except for her. She held one of his shirts against her chest, breathing in the familiar scent, clean, expensive, unmistakably him. The smell that had once made her feel chosen. Now it made her feel temporary. "June," she said gently, "how long do you expect me to live like this?" He was seated on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone, half listening. That alone stung more than she expected. "Like what?" he asked distractedly. "Like a secret." That got his attention. He looked up slowly, brows knitting together. "Why are we doing this tonight?" Kristen lowered the shirt, folding it neatly like she had folded herself for months. "Because I can't keep pretending I don't want more." Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Loaded. Outside, rain tapped against the glass, a soft but persistent sound, like a warning. Jun Hyuk stood and straightened his sleeves, already defensive. "You knew my life was complicated." "I knew it was complicated," she said calmly. "I didn't know I would be erased." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Kristen, you're being emotional." The word hit her like a slap. "Emotional?" she repeated quietly. "I've been patient, respectful, invisible. If that's emotional, then yes, I am." She walked closer, her voice steady, but her hands trembling. "I've missed birthdays alone. I've watched women pose beside you for cameras while you pretended not to know me. I've listened to rumors about you marrying someone else while sleeping next to you at night." Her eyes met his. "How much quieter do you need me to be?" Jun Hyuk looked away. That, more than anything, was when she knew. "I can't just bring you into my world," he said finally. "You don't understand how things work." "Then explain it to me," Kristen said. "Explain why loving me openly feels impossible." He laughed once. Short. Bitter. "My parents would never accept this," he said. "My investors wouldn't understand. The public." "And you?" she interrupted. "Do you accept me?" He hesitated. That hesitation cracked something open. "I love you," he said, but the words felt rehearsed now. "But love isn't enough." Kristen nodded slowly, her heart pounding. "Then say it." "Say what?" "Say why I can't stand beside you." Jun Hyuk's jaw tightened. The pride rose up in him like armor. "You want honesty?" he said sharply. "Fine." She braced herself. He gestured vaguely between them. "This, us, it's not something my world is built for." "And why is that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. His eyes hardened. "Because men like me don't end up with women like you." The room went still. Kristen felt the words before she understood them, like cold water poured directly onto her chest. "A woman like me," she repeated. "Yes," he said, exhaling sharply, frustration spilling over. "A black woman. Foreign. Different. You don't fit the image." There it was. Not shouted. Not screamed. Just spoken. "No man wants a woman like you," he added, almost as if stating a fact. "Not in my position." Kristen didn't cry. Her tears froze somewhere deep inside her, turning into something far more dangerous, clarity. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked. This man who held her in the dark, but denied her in the light. This man who loved her privately, but judged her publicly. This man who could reduce everything she was to a category. "I see," she said softly. Jun Hyuk frowned. "You're twisting my words." "No," she replied. "I'm finally hearing them." She stepped back, creating distance between their bodies and their realities. "You know what hurts the most?" she continued. "It's not that your world is small. It's that you were willing to make me smaller, so you could stay comfortable in it." He opened his mouth, But no words came. Kristen walked into the bedroom and began packing. Not dramatically. Not hurriedly. With dignity. She folded her clothes carefully, placing them into her suitcase like each item was a memory she was laying to rest. Jun Hyuk stood in the doorway, watching. "You're overreacting," he said weakly. She paused, then turned to him. "No," she said. "I'm waking up." Her voice didn't shake. That scared him more than anger ever could. "I loved you," she continued. "But I will never beg someone to see my worth." She zipped the suitcase closed. The sound echoed through the room like a final sentence. As she walked past him, he reached out instinctively, then stopped himself. Kristen didn't look back. The elevator ride down felt endless. Each floor passed like a layer of illusion peeling away. By the time the doors opened, she was no longer his secret. She was a woman who had just been told she wasn't enough, and decided she would never believe it. Behind her, high above the city, Jun Hyuk stood alone in his perfect penthouse. For the first time, silence didn't protect him. It accused him. The airport was loud, but Kristen felt wrapped in a strange, ringing silence. Announcements echoed overhead in 3 different languages. Wheels rolled across polished floors. Couples leaned into each other. Families laughed, argued, embraced. Life moved forward without pausing to ask her if she was ready. Kristen stood alone at the departure gate with one suitcase and a handbag that felt too light for everything she was carrying inside. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. Not her friends in Seoul, few as they were. Not the acquaintances who knew her only as Jun Hyuk's foreign girlfriend. Never by name. And certainly not him. She checked her phone once. Just once. No messages. She told herself she wasn't disappointed. She told herself this was exactly what she needed, that clean breaks were merciful. But as the boarding call sounded, her chest tightened anyway. This was it. No dramatic goodbye. No apology. No explanation that would make the words "no man wants a woman like you" hurt any less. She boarded the plane and took her seat by the window. As the aircraft lifted into the gray sky above Seoul, Kristen watched the city disappear beneath the clouds. She didn't cry. Not then. New York didn't welcome her with open arms. It greeted her with cold wind, crowded streets, and the brutal honesty of starting over. Kristen moved into a small apartment in Brooklyn that barely fit her suitcases. The walls were thin. The radiator hissed like it was angry at being alive. Outside her window, the city buzzed relentlessly, unconcerned with her heartbreak. At night, the silence was unbearable. There was no penthouse glow. No city stretching endlessly below her. No familiar weight beside her in bed. Just memories. She tried to keep busy. Applied for jobs. Went to networking events where people smiled politely and forgot her name 5 minutes later. She told herself she was fine. But grief doesn't ask permission. It arrived at night, in the quiet moments when she caught herself reaching for her phone. When a song played in a cafe. When she passed couples holding hands without fear. Some nights she lay awake replaying every conversation, searching desperately for the moment she should have spoken sooner, demanded more, loved less. Other nights, she remembered the way he had looked at her in private, like she was everything, and wondered how the same man could strip her down to nothing with a sentence. Her confidence cracked. Maybe he's right, a voice whispered. Maybe I was foolish to believe love could be enough. She hated that voice. Hated how convincing it sounded. Money grew tight. Kristen sold a few things she'd brought back from Seoul, designer dresses she no longer wanted memories of. She started freelancing, consulting, doing any work that paid quickly. It was exhausting, humbling, and strangely clarifying. There was no one to impress now. No image to maintain. No silence to preserve. Just survival. One night, after a particularly long day, Kristen sat on the floor of her apartment with her laptop open, papers spread around her like pieces of a puzzle. She stared at her old notes, ideas she'd once pitched casually, dreams she'd softened to fit other people's expectations. Fashion tech. Ethical sourcing. Digital platforms connecting underrepresented designers to global markets. Ideas people had once told her were interesting but risky. She laughed quietly to herself. Risky, she thought. Funny how they never said that about loving a man who hid me. Something shifted. It wasn't confidence, not yet. It was resolve. Kristen stopped waiting to be chosen. She worked like she had something to prove, but not to the world. To herself. Days blurred into nights. She studied. Learned. Failed. Adjusted. Learned again. She faced rejection emails without flinching. She stopped taking no personally and started taking it strategically. There were moments she almost broke. When an investor dismissed her with a thin smile. When someone suggested she find a safer direction. When loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin. But every time doubt crept in, his voice echoed in her memory. No man wants a woman like you. And each time, she answered it silently. Then I will build a life that doesn't need a man's permission. Slowly, the pain changed texture. It became fuel. Months passed, then a year. Kristen stopped crying over him. She stopped wondering if he missed her. She stopped romanticizing the love that had required her to disappear.
Her posture changed.
Her voice grew steadier. Her dreams grew louder. One afternoon, she caught her reflection in a cafe window, tired, focused, alive, and barely recognized herself. She wasn't healed, but she was becoming. And somewhere across the ocean, in a glass tower overlooking Seoul, Jun Hyuk lived on uninterrupted, never realizing that the woman he had dismissed was quietly transforming the wound he gave her into a future he would one day envy. Kristen closed her laptop that night with a calm certainty settling into her bones. She had left with nothing but dignity. And dignity, she was learning, was a foundation strong enough to build an empire on. Success did not arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, like the first deep breath after nearly drowning. Kristen's breakthrough happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning in a glass-walled conference room in Lower Manhattan. She had rehearsed the pitch 100 times, rewritten the deck more than she could count, memorized every question she expected to be asked. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the sleeves of her blazer. Across the table sat investors who had overlooked her once before. This time, she didn't soften her ideas. She didn't apologize for ambition. She didn't explain herself into smallness. She spoke with clarity, with authority, with a calm that came from surviving something far more brutal than rejection. When the meeting ended, one of them leaned back and said, "Why hasn't anyone funded this already?" Kristen smiled, polite and restrained. "They weren't looking closely," she replied. That was the day everything shifted. Funding followed. Then partnerships. Then press. Her platform, Elev, became a bridge between independent designers of color and global luxury markets. Ethical. Profitable. Impossible to ignore. Articles described her as brilliant, unapologetic, and refreshingly exacting. She read none of them at first. She was too busy working. Success didn't erase her past. It recontextualized it. The woman who had once waited quietly was now setting the tempo. 3 years passed. Kristen stood backstage at an international tech and fashion summit in Seoul, listening to her name being announced in a language that once excluded her. Kristen Thompson, founder and CEO of Elev. The applause hit her like a wave. She inhaled slowly. This wasn't revenge. It was arrival. She stepped onto the stage wearing a tailored black silk gown that caught the light without begging for it. Gold accents brushed her wrists. Her hair was natural, regal, unhidden. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't need to. But he saw her. Jun Hyuk sat stiffly at a table near the front, his expression unreadable as the screen behind her displayed her face, her story, her success. This wasn't the woman he had hidden. This was a woman being introduced to the world. Kristen spoke calmly, deliberately. She talked about innovation, representation, global collaboration, power structures that needed redesigning. She spoke as if she belonged, because she did. Jun Hyuk felt the room lean toward her. Every laugh, every nod, every moment of applause landed like a quiet reckoning. When she finished, the standing ovation was immediate. Kristen bowed slightly and exited without searching the audience. Backstage, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Congratulations. Invitations. Deals waiting to be signed. She ignored one notification. A name she hadn't seen in years. Kong Jun Hyuk. She didn't delete it. She didn't open it. Later that evening, she entered the gala hall where chandeliers glowed and champagne flowed. Cameras turned instinctively toward her. Reporters whispered. People angled their bodies to face her, eager to be remembered standing nearby. Kristen moved through the room with measured grace. Then she felt it. That familiar presence. Jun Hyuk stood several feet away, watching her like she was a memory that refused to stay buried. Their eyes met briefly. Kristen held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she turned away. Not out of bitterness. Out of completion. She laughed easily with people who spoke to her directly. Who asked her thoughts. Who didn't look past her to see who else mattered more. Across the room, Jun Hyuk watched something he had never imagined. Kristen without need. Without longing. Without him. He finally understood that she had not risen to prove him wrong. She had risen because she had been right all along. That night, Kristen stood on a balcony overlooking the Seoul skyline, the same city that once held her as a shadow. Now it reflected her light. She closed her eyes, feeling the breeze brush against her skin. The past no longer hurt. It had done its job. Kristen felt him before she saw him. There was a shift in the air behind her, a subtle tension, like a room holding its breath. The balcony doors slid open softly, and she didn't turn around.
She didn't need to.
Some presences linger in your body long after your heart has moved on. Kristen. Her name sounded different in his mouth now.
Smaller. Careful.
She took another sip of her champagne before facing him, giving herself exactly 1 heartbeat to remember who she was now. When she turned, her expression was polite. Neutral. Finished. Yes, she said. Can I help you? Jun Hyuk stood there in an impeccably tailored suit, but the confidence she once knew so intimately had thinned. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, his eyes unsettled. I didn't think you'd talk to me, he admitted. Kristen tilted her head slightly. You spoke to me just fine the last time we talked. The reminder landed quietly and cut deeply. He swallowed. I was wrong. She studied him in silence, not to punish him, not to savor the moment, but because this was the first time she had ever truly looked at him without loving him. I've replayed it 1,000 times, he continued. What I said,
What I didn't say.
how I failed you. Kristen's voice remained calm. And what conclusion did you come to? That I was afraid, he said, of my family, of my reputation, of losing everything. She nodded. And I was what you were willing to lose. The truth hung between them like glass. I loved you, he said quickly. I still. Please don't, Kristen interrupted gently. That stopped him. Love that requires erasure isn't love, she said. It's ownership disguised as affection. Jun Hyuk took a step closer, then stopped himself, as if remembering he no longer had that right. You have no idea how much I regret it, he said quietly. Seeing you tonight, realizing who you've become, Kristen met his gaze steadily. I didn't become this to impress you. I know, he whispered. That's what makes it unbearable. She looked away then, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she didn't want him to mistake her composure for cruelty. You once told me no man wanted a woman like me, she said calmly. Do you remember that?
His face tightened.
Every day. Good, she replied. Then remember this too. She turned back to him, her voice firm but not angry. The world didn't reject me.
You did.
And the world welcomed me anyway. Something in him cracked. I was a coward, he said. I thought power meant control. I thought love meant possession. Kristen smiled faintly. Power is being able to stand beside someone without shrinking them. Silence stretched. Below them, the city shimmered, indifferent, eternal. Is there any chance, he asked finally, that I could be part of your life again? Kristen considered the question. Not emotionally. Practically. She thought about the woman she had been, waiting, hoping, accepting crumbs dressed up as devotion. And then she thought about the woman she was now. No, she said softly. There isn't. He closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing against a wave. You don't hate me, he said. No, she agreed. I don't. That somehow hurt him more. I forgave you a long time ago, she continued. Not for you, for me. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. She stepped past him toward the doors. As she walked away, she paused, not to look back, but to leave him with the truth he needed. You didn't lose me because of society, she said. You lost me because you believed I was something to be ashamed of. Then she left. Jun-hyuk remained on the balcony long after the doors closed behind her. For the first time in his life, regret wasn't abstract. It had a face, a voice, a future he could see clearly and would never touch. And across the room, Kristen rejoined the celebration effortlessly, surrounded by people who spoke her name with respect, who saw her fully, openly, without hesitation. She didn't feel victorious. She felt free. Regret did not arrive all at once for Jun-hyuk. It crept in gradually, disguising itself as nostalgia. At first, it was small things, the absence of Kristen's voice in his penthouse, the way silence now lingered where her laughter used to live. The city outside his windows looked the same, but it no longer felt like it belonged to him. He told himself he was busy, that life had simply moved on. But something had shifted. Meetings felt colder. Conversations felt transactional. People listened to him but no longer leaned in the way they once had. For the first time, Jun-hyuk felt the difference between being respected and being tolerated. The cracks in his world didn't announce themselves. They whispered. A delayed investment. A partnership quietly withdrawn. A board member who stopped returning calls. His family's company, once untouchable, was beginning to falter under the weight of outdated leadership and unchecked arrogance. Decisions made to preserve image instead of innovation came back like unpaid debts. And Kristen's name? It kept appearing. On international panels. On business shortlists. On covers of magazines he pretended not to read. Each time he saw her, something twisted inside him. Not jealousy, exactly, but recognition. She had outgrown the world he was still clinging to. Meanwhile, Kristen was living a life that felt expansive in ways she once believed were reserved for other people. Her company opened offices in Paris, Lagos, and Seoul. Designers sought her out not just for access, but for partnership. She was known as exacting but fair, visionary but grounded. She didn't have to announce her power. People felt it. She moved through spaces without shrinking, without apologizing for her presence, without waiting to be invited. And love? Love found her gently. Not as a rescue, not as a replacement, but as a recognition. He was different from Jun-hyuk in every way that mattered. Open.
Secure.
Unafraid to say her name in any room. When he reached for her hand in public, there was no hesitation, only pride. Kristen noticed the difference immediately. There was no hiding, no careful wording, no silent negotiations about who she needed to be. She didn't have to earn space. She was given it freely. Back in Seoul, the scandals finally broke. Poor investments, internal conflicts, leadership decisions questioned publicly for the first time. The Kong family name, once synonymous with certainty, became associated with stagnation. Jun-hyuk attended emergency meetings where younger executives challenged him openly, where his last name no longer ended arguments. He found himself thinking of Kristen in moments he shouldn't have. She would have seen this coming, he thought. She would have pushed for change. The irony burned. He had dismissed her insight once. Now he desperately needed it. One evening, alone in his penthouse, Jun-hyuk poured himself a drink he barely tasted. The city glowed beneath him, just as it always had. But the view felt hollow. He remembered Kristen standing there once, quiet, thoughtful, full of questions he hadn't wanted to answer. You don't fit the image, he had said. Now the image was crumbling. Months later, his resignation was announced quietly. No press conference. No celebration. Just a line buried deep in a business article. Stepping aside to allow new leadership. The world moved on. Kristen read the article one morning while sipping coffee in her sunlit apartment. She paused only briefly before scrolling past it. Not out of cruelty. Out of peace. She had learned something invaluable. Closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from alignment. That evening, she attended a charity gala, not as a guest, but as a host. She stood beside her partner, confident, radiant, fully seen. Cameras flashed. Applause followed. Somewhere in the distance, Jun-hyuk watched the broadcast alone. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. Just clarity. Pride had cost him everything that mattered. And Kristen? Kristen had turned pain into direction, rejection into refinement, silence into sovereignty. She had not needed to defeat him. She had simply outgrown him. Time had a way of softening sharp memories, but it never erased the ones that mattered. Kristen learned that happiness didn't arrive like a final destination. It unfolded quietly, in ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were honest. Morning sunlight spilling across her kitchen floor. Hands intertwined without hesitation. Conversations that didn't require explanation or translation. She had stopped measuring her life by milestones meant to impress other people. She measured it now by peace. The man beside her, Ethan, didn't try to complete her. He didn't compete with her light or ask her to dim it so he could feel taller. He simply walked with her, openly, proudly, as if loving her were the most natural thing in the world. At events, he introduced her without qualifiers. This is Kristen, my partner. Not accomplished, not exceptional for a woman like her. Just Kristen. And the way he said it made her chest ache, in a good way. Years passed. Kristen's company became a global standard. Young Black women wrote to her from across continents, telling her how seeing her succeed had changed what they believed was possible. She read every letter. Some nights, she sat quietly with them spread across her table, humbled by the realization that the pain she once thought would destroy her had become something larger than herself. She never spoke publicly about Jun-hyuk, not because she was protecting him, but because he no longer belonged to her story. Jun-hyuk aged differently, not in years but in spirit. He still lived comfortably, still attended high-profile gatherings, still carried the weight of a famous name. But something was missing. In conversations, he found himself listening more than speaking, watching instead of commanding. The world no longer bent automatically in his direction. People remembered his past more than they anticipated his future. Sometimes, late at night, he replayed moments he hadn't understood when they happened. Kristen standing at the window, quiet but full of questions. Kristen packing her suitcase without drama. Kristen walking away without anger. He had mistaken her dignity for weakness. That was the mistake that haunted him most. One evening, years after their last conversation, fate placed them in the same room again. A charity event in Paris. Muted lighting. Soft music. A gathering of people who had arrived. Kristen entered with Ethan at her side. She was radiant, not because of what she wore, but because of how comfortably she existed within herself. Jun-hyuk felt the recognition instantly. Not longing, not hope, acceptance. He watched her laugh, lean into Ethan's shoulder, exist without guarding herself. And for the first time, he didn't feel entitled to grief. He felt accountable. Kristen noticed him eventually, not because she was searching, but because awareness came naturally now. Their eyes met across the room. There was no tension, no ache, just acknowledgement. She inclined her head politely. A greeting.
A goodbye.
A boundary. Jun-hyuk returned the nod. And in that small, quiet exchange, he understood something devastatingly clear. She had survived him. She had surpassed him. And she had done so without needing him to witness it. Later that night, Kristen stood on a balcony overlooking the Seine, the city glowing softly around her. Ethan joined her, wrapping a coat around her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked gently. She smiled. Better than okay. Because she was. She had become the woman she once needed someone else to validate. She had learned that rejection was not a verdict, it was redirection. That love should never require translation. That dignity, once chosen, becomes unshakable. Behind her, the past stood still. Ahead of her, life continued, wide open. And somewhere in the quiet corners of memory, a man lived with the knowledge that the greatest loss of his life wasn't a business deal or a reputation. It was a woman he once told didn't belong. She became his greatest regret. Not because she came back, but because she never needed to.